You know as a doctor that men have a biological advantage. Muscle mass, lung capacity, blah, 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 blah. It's why we separate the sexes. Otherwise, in the Olympics, women wouldn't win any gold medals, or silver, or bronze.
Not true.
Actually, women would win.
I've got a good idea for
I think
you.
I read a survey that said women might win 2 medals in the entire Olympics if they made it gender neutral, which would be a disgrace. Now, Dr. Webley, why are you as a doctor trying to ignore biology?
I haven't been able to speak yet, so I don't know why I'm being...
Feel free, fire away.
It. Thank you. I've got a really good idea, right? There's a load of debate about puberty blockers and gender-affirming care amongst transgender people worldwide. If we let transgender young people, transgender feminine young people, have access to the puberty blockers and gender-affirming hormones that they are asking to have, then they wouldn't build that muscle mass, they wouldn't have increased skeletal size, and they wouldn't have
What
the
age are you going to
advantage.
do this?
Well, you usually get puberty blockers when puberty starts. That's
So what age are you going to do this to kids?
Well, I just answered, when puberty starts.
Give me an age.
Well, puberty starts between the ages of around about 8 to 11.
You're going to give 8-year-olds drugs to try and resolve this problem. Have you learned nothing from the whole Tavistock clinic thing? Well, I don't think it's funny. I'm a father of 4 kids, including a 13-year-old girl. I don't think any of this is funny. The fact that your solution is to drug, is to block puberty for 8-year-old kids. Really?
I'm a mother of 5 children, and I believe that every single child deserves the right to live their best life.
Absolutely fine.
And
as Tommy said, nobody has a problem.
That is a transgender
you can live as a dog or a cat, as far as I'm concerned. It's
no,
fine.
I don't think I'd let my children do that. Sorry,
well, actually, there are kids at school called furries who go as a cat. And I said...
We've had this argument time and time again.
And my solution, by the way,
furries.
my solution is I would absolutely respect their right to be a little furry cat, and I would give them a little litter tray outside the thing where they could go and urinate, and I give them cat food. And trust me, after 2 days, they're back being girls again. Tommy,
Here's, I have a question.
Tommy, the answer, Tommy...
Really
well, hang on, Sarah. Hang on, don't all talk at once. Tommy, the answer apparently is to give puberty blockers to 8-year-olds.
So my question...
That's called child abuse. And the fact that you have somebody on this panel that is advocating for the ability to debilitate young boys so that they have gender delusion, so that their body is now being mutilated, their actual biology is being changed irreversibly so that they compete against little girls. That's really the solution here. Let's debilitate boys so they don't have an advantage. Let's make sure that they don't have better muscle capacity and lung capacity. Let's make sure that they're just debilitated. Why don't we just break their arms and their legs while we're at it so that they can compete against the little girls? Do you realize how sick that sounds? That's abuse.
So Turning Point Academy mentions the importance of promoting intellectual growth. How would you respond to critics that such an education system stifles intellectual growth through establishing a fixed set of values, for example, regarding God, life beginning at conception, and 2 genders, rather than promoting intellectual diversity?
Sure. I mean, at some point, you're going to have to get to a truth claim. So even to say that you want intellectual diversity means that you think intellectual diversity matters, but by what standard? So you have to actually at some point say that something is good. So if someone says, well, the criticism that you're going to tell a kid that something is good, something else, you should have intellectual diversity. Okay, why? By what standard? By what book? By what scholar? By what author? By what worldview? We believe, as a organization, that the West is the best for many reasons. In particular, my own personal views. I'm a Christian. I'm not ashamed of it. And Christianity brought to the world things that we all take for granted. Tom Holland, who actually was educated here and is one of the great classicists and taught himself ancient Greek, he wrote in his book Dominion that even if you hate Christianity, your critique of Christianity is actually using Christianity itself. And so this idea of intellectual diversity, I totally support that. And I think that students should read different books and should read different authors. At some point, though, the purpose of education is not to have an endless buffet line for students to sample every bad idea in the world. It's to point them to the good, the true, and the beautiful. And I think we've lost what the purpose of education is. Education in Latin literally means to lead forth. To lead forth out of the cave was the original analogy. And so at Turning Point Academy, we take the biblical idea to train a child up in the ways in which they will go, and we make no apologies for instituting a belief that believing in God is better than secularism, defense of universal human equality is a good for all humanity, amongst many other things that you articulated.
So I wanted to know either your thoughts on masculinity and the definition of that, or religious, using religion as the objective morality.
Which one would you like me to
whatever
tackle?
hasn't been covered as much.
Yeah, what it means to be a man hasn't been covered.
Okay, yeah,
right?
let's talk about
that. To be a man is to have self-control over your fleshly desires and an attitude towards courage and defending those that can't defend themselves, fostering a family towards godly purposes, and picking the fights that the rest of society should not be involved in. That's what men should do.
Understood. So with the godly purposes, do you believe that if a person is not religious, that they are less of a man because of it?
No, I don't. But
Okay.
I do say, though, by what standard do we say them good or not so good? So if someone is not religious, that's going to be an eternal problem that they'll have to figure out.
Understood.
However, if someone is not religious, we have to look at how they act and how they raise their kids. By what standard? We view that through a Western Christian ethic.
Yep.
And so through the Western Christian ethic, we judge what is a good man and what is not a good man. And the Bible is full of great men and not so great men, right? And even the great men of the Bible made a lot of mistakes, right? The great man of Moses killed somebody. The great man of Abraham sold his wife basically into slavery in Egypt. But they also did a lot of good. The best story for young men right now is Genesis 12 of the Bible, which is basically like get off your tail, leave your father's home, and go on an adventure for God's purpose. And of course, all throughout the scriptures, men in particular are called at this time, and it's the Hebrew word hineni, which means here I am, which is God will call you to a place out of comfort and into duty. We see that with the calling of Isaiah, the calling of Samuel. We see that with Moses. We see that with the calling of Jacob. And so we as men need to be called sometimes, not what we want to do, but what we ought to do, which is that word that I love that is being lost in America so much as called duty.
Makes sense. So one more question to that is, do you believe that the modern movement to of feelings and men with feelings and stuff like that makes them any less of a man, or things like therapy or whatever?
I mean, of course, we as men must have feelings, but women are more emotional. That is how they are wired. However, here's the issue, is that we as men need to do a job as society in our families and our marriages to always make sure our reason triumph over feelings. That is largely what the biblical role is, and how it made this country so great, is that we must have deep feeling and also deep thinking in our life, both of which. And if we're honest, we've had way too much feeling and way too much emotion-centric governing over the last couple of decades, especially the last 10 years, and not nearly enough reason, calculation. And so, look, a man who's in touch with his feelings, fine. However, if that verges on the line of self-indulgent narcissism, and towards what end? And by the way, the number one feeling you should have is adoration for a God that made you. The greatest feeling is you should always petition those things to the Almighty. And
I guess this might be a little off, but for people that have had multiple experiences trying to connect with God or some sort of higher power in some form, but have not been able to find that, what would that person do you believe?
Well, what you aim at is what you get. The first thing is you got to read the Bible every day. And then finally, if you want to get closer to God.
Imagine an America without religion, a country where the guiding principles of faith, which have shaped much of its moral and ethical framework, no longer hold sway. Just imagine. In such a society, every individual operates based on their own personal moral code, and the very foundation that has long helped to define right from wrong is fragmented into countless subjective viewpoints. Ladies and gentlemen, when we throw away God, everything turns into chaos. When we try to replace God with science or with whatever, everything turns into chaos. Without a shared religious or spiritual framework, the moral compass that traditionally unified people, it would disintegrate. It would disintegrate, leaving people to determine what is right or wrong for themselves. Can you imagine a society like that? Can you imagine? While to many this may sound appealing, to some who view religion as outdated or restrictive, the consequence of such a reality is concerning. Yeah, the consequence of such a reality is so concerning. Chaos, ladies and gentlemen. Moreover, far-left media outlets and the dominant liberal narrative often rely on emotionally charged rhetoric to appeal to the feelings rather than to the logic of young people. Can you imagine? It's like they throw away common sense and say, we will live by our feelings. We don't care about common sense. We don't care. There is also a spiritual dimension to this shift, and it's important to acknowledge the weight of what it means to deny our Creator, ladies and gentlemen. Remember in Matthew 10 verse 33, it says, "But whosoever shall deny me before men, him also will I deny before my Father who is in heaven." Think about that. This verse, it serves to remind us of the importance of standing firm in our faith and not being ashamed to acknowledge God in our lives. Never be ashamed to acknowledge God in your life. Never be, because denying Him is not simply a personal choice, but it has eternal consequences. There are eternal consequences. When we fail to acknowledge our Creator, we are distancing ourselves from the very source of our moral compass, our values, our purpose. This is why faith is so essential in our moral framework. Faith is so essential. It's very important, ladies and gentlemen. It keeps us grounded in something bigger than ourselves and reminds us that our actions have deeper significance. Literally, by publicly acknowledging and living out our faith, we show the world that we are committed to something greater than personal success or self-interest. Yes, we demonstrate that our lives are guided by values that are transcend worldly concerns. This acknowledgement, ladies and gentlemen, also brings us into alignment with the Creator's purpose for our lives, which is love, to serve, to uplift others, salvation for humanity. The teachings of Jesus emphasize the importance of living a life of humility, kindness, and selflessness. You see, qualities that build strong, compassionate societies. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, in a society without religion, everything would become acceptable to those who choose to live by their own standards, without the checks and balances provided by religious teachings that emphasize love, respect, compassion, and accountability. The understanding of right and wrong would no longer be anchored in universal principles. Just think about it. Or of the belief of a higher power or a moral lawgiver. Just think about it. Instead, it would be entirely subjective, with each individual deciding what actions are justified or ethical based on their own personal feelings or desires. Can you imagine that? I know to some people, they may view this as a freedom of expression, but it will lead to moral chaos. It will lead to moral chaos, as different people could easily justify harmful behavior simply because it aligns with their own self-interest or perceived worldview. Those are the dangers. America was truly better when we acknowledged and thanked our Creator, because religion not only provides spiritual guidance, but it also fosters the kind of moral values that create a thriving society. Yes, by embracing faith, we honor God, we honor our Creator, uplift others, and live with purpose. Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, it is time to return to those core values and allow them to guide us in a world that increasingly needs moral clarity, compassion, and unity. Let us live out the teachings of Jesus, acknowledging God with gratitude and love. Let us do that, fostering a society that reflects these timeless principles. Yeah.